Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are looking at a pretty fiery, unapologetic rant from personal finance personality Dave Ramsey. It's a fast-paced blueprint detailing his 5 things that will make you wealthy. And I mean, this is intense. We're going to preview the core themes here, taking extreme personal responsibility, aggressively ignoring critics, budgeting every single dollar, escaping debt, investing, and ultimately arriving at a place where you can be outrageously generous.
Oh, it really is an intense piece of audio to break down.
Yeah, it is. Before we get into the Deep Dives mission, I want to say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. So the goal today is to unpack this tough love, common sense advice. Ramsey claims it's proven over his 30 years in the financial industry,
Right, 30 years is a long track record to point to.
Exactly. But we need to separate the fundamental wealth-building principles from his really intense rhetoric.
Yeah, you can practically feel the heat radiating off the source material. It is definitely not a calm lecture.
No, it's like a verbal bulldozer.
A bulldozer that, borders on offensive for some people. To really understand why this blunt, no excuses delivery resonates so strongly with audiences looking for financial guidance, we have to look at the immediate context of his rant.
Okay, set the stage for us. What's the context?
Well, he opens by aggressively defending his methods against a sea of critics. He specifically calls out what he terms broke 26-year-old journalism students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he says they're buried in student loan debt while writing hit pieces about him. And he also goes after the Twitter trolls constantly ragging on him. From a psychological angle, this blunt delivery acts as a massive shock to the system.
I mean, we live in an era of deep financial anxiety.
Exactly. Advice is usually couched in endless caveats. But for an audience desperate for a lifeline, a voice that projects absolute, unyielding certainty and actively refuses to coddle them, that actually feels incredibly secure.
Right. It cuts right through the paralyzing noise. I completely see the appeal of that absolute conviction. It offers a clear path out of the woods.
It really does.
And that conviction brings us to the foundation of his entire philosophy, because you can't build wealth without knowing where your money goes.
Which naturally leads to his first 2 foundational rules.
Right. Rule 1 is the written plan, the budget. He introduces this by leaning into biblical wisdom, specifically quoting Jesus.
The part about building the tower, right?
Yeah, exactly. Jesus talking about not building a tower without first counting the cost, lest you get halfway up and people mock you because you can't finish it.
The core message there is pretty brutal but true. No one accidentally wins at anything. Let's think about the mechanics of human behavior for a second. By default, human beings drift toward the path of least resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Instant gratification.
Right. So if you don't dictate exactly where your financial resources are going before the month even begins, those resources are inevitably going to be consumed by the friction of daily life. The extra coffee, the forgotten streaming subscriptions.
The impulse buys at the grocery store, it all just vanishes.
Exactly. Counting the cost means sitting down with a piece of paper and forcing yourself to face the mathematical reality of your limitations.
And once you stop giving your money to the invisible expenses, you're forced to look at what you actually bring in. Which brings us to rule 2, getting out of debt.
Yeah, this is where he gets really animated.
Oh, for sure. He outlines that your income is your most powerful wealth-building tool. And he has this incredibly memorable detail in the source. He basically says that giving your money to banks so they can fill up the skyline and have furniture nicer than yours is, stupid.
It's a brilliant rhetorical device. He takes the boring concept of interest rates and turns it into a tangible, infuriating image. You literally are funding a bank executive's mahogany desk while struggling to buy groceries.
Yeah, it's powerful reframing. It makes me think of, carrying debt is like trying to run a marathon, but you're wearing a backpack full of rocks.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
You can have the best shoes and train every day, but that backpack means every step takes 3 times the effort.
Okay, let's unpack this. Is Ramsey's aggressive tone here, calling his critics wrong and saying they were literally peeing in their diapers while he was building wealth, is that a calculated motivational tactic or just pure frustration with modern financial discourse?
I think it's highly calculated, even if it stems from a place of genuine long-term frustration. The tone is explicitly designed to jolt the listener out of complacency.
So turning financial passivity into an urgent mission.
Precisely. Most people don't ruin their lives with one massive mistake, like buying a yacht they can't afford. They ruin it through decades of soft, socially acceptable borrowing. But using language that is purposely offensive, Mocking the diapers, calling the alternative stupid, he manufactures an artificial crisis in your mind.
You're going to war to reclaim your income.
Exactly.
Okay, so once you stop giving your money to the banks, you are forced to look at what you're actually bringing in. And this brings us to Ramsey's most controversial stance.
The stagnant wages argument. Right. Rule 3. Live on less than you make. He brings up a proverb he cites, that the wise man stores choice food and oil, but a fool devours all he has.
And then he launches into that fierce pushback against the idea of stagnant wages.
Yeah, break that down for us, because it's a huge part of the rant.
He argues that wages are only stagnant because the people are stagnant. He argues this isn't Russia. You are operating in a free market. If Walmart or McDonald's doesn't pay enough, you are not stuck. You can quit and go somewhere else.
Now, I need to jump in here for a quick impartiality check, because the source material dives into some politically charged territory to make this point.
Right, he doesn't hold back there either.
No, he doesn't. He claims that a, quote, liberal journalist might tell you that you're stuck, and that politicians in Washington, and he explicitly names Democrats, Republicans, and even Santa Claus, he says they cannot add, they will not send you money, and they won't fix your life.
Yeah, he takes shots at everyone.
He does. And we must emphasize for you listening, we're absolutely not endorsing these political views. We're simply conveying Ramsey's worldview here, which demands extreme self-reliance.
We are analyzing the mechanics of his argument, not the politics. To Ramsey, waiting for Washington or a corporation to fix your life is a complete waste of your time.
Which leads to his vivid analogy about stagnant pond water. He says if water sits there, it grows scum on top. And his advice is to leave the cave, kill something, and drag it home.
It's an incredibly primal way to view the job market.
It is, but I have to push back here. While just quit sounds incredibly empowering in a rant,
Yeah.
isn't there a massive practical gap between realizing you need to leave the cave and actually having the tools to hunt?
That is the most common critique of his philosophy, absolutely. Not everyone has a shiny spear waiting outside the cave. People deal with massive systemic barriers.
Right, lack of local industry, health crises, all of that.
But psychologically, Ramsey would argue that focusing on that gap is just another excuse. The engine of his method requires you to believe you can cross the gap through sheer willpower. The moment you admit the gap is too wide, you give yourself psychological permission to stay in the cave.
And let the scum grow, as he'd say.
Right. It's a framework that demands you focus 100% on what you can control.
Okay, so if the listener successfully controls their income and escapes stagnation, what do they actually do with the extra money? This moves the conversation from earning to investing. Rule 4, save and invest.
And here he does something highly unusual for a financial personality. He explicitly states he doesn't care if people agree with his investment assumptions.
Yeah, he completely waves off the nerdy, toxic debates over things like expense ratios or load versus no-load funds.
Or the endless arguments about the S&P 500 versus real estate.
Exactly. The brutal truth he delivers is that the biggest problem with your investments is simply that you don't have any.
It sounds overly simple, but he's attacking a very real behavioral bias. People get bogged down in theoretical optimization while their actual money just sits in a checking account losing value.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Arguing over financial expense ratios before you've saved a dollar is literally like arguing over the aerodynamics of a bicycle before you've learned to pedal.
Oh, I love that analogy. It fits perfectly.
Right. But does hyper-focusing on the perfect investment actually paralyze people from starting?
It absolutely paralyzes them. In finance, perfectionism is often just procrastination wearing a tailored suit. By telling the audience he doesn't care about their investment opinions, he strips away the illusion that financial complexity is the barrier. Your own hesitation is the barrier.
And once you actually start, you build what he calls margin. But then he issues a massive warning about acting rich, the whole Ferrari delusion.
Yes, he points out that real millionaires don't buy Ferraris. Only the ultra-rich or morons do. True wealth is often completely invisible.
And again, keeping our neutral stance, we have to mention his dismissal of the idea that rich people get wealthy by ripping people off. He labels that as liberal nonsense.
Right. Regardless of your political leaning, his internal logic requires you to view wealth accumulation as a moral positive. You can't aggressively pursue a goal you resent.
If you think saving makes you the villain, you'll sabotage yourself.
Exactly. And clearing that moral ambiguity clears the path for unapologetic accumulation, which leads to the final step.
Right, the ultimate surprising payoff. All of this strict discipline, avoiding flashy cars, fighting off the scum of stagnation, it all leads to Rule 5. be outrageously generous.
It's a huge pivot from the greedy capitalist stereotype.
It really is. Once you have a plan, no debt, live on less than you make and invest, you get to be outrageously, randomly, lavishly generous.
The ultimate goal isn't to sit alone on a pile of gold. It's to reach a point of financial invulnerability where you can actively intervene in the lives of others.
But true to form, he contrasts this with his critique of broke people. He says they can't be generous because they just sit around discussing investment philosophies while doing nothing.
Right, prioritizing utility over theory.
And the source has this hilariously biting comparison. He likens these passive people to people smoking weed, discussing the meaning of life, without ever getting anything done.
It's harsh, but it emphasizes that action dictates value in his worldview.
So what does this all mean? It's a fascinating irony, isn't it? We have a rant filled with blunt insults, calling people stupid, morons, mocking critics, and it ultimately concludes with a passionate plea for radical, lavish generosity.
It's because, in his framework, compassion without capacity is useless. He insults the behaviors that rob you of your capacity to help others. To synthesize the core takeaways for the listener, Ramsey's wealth-building strategy is ultimately about choosing aggressive action over passive philosophy.
It requires a strict sequence of personal accountability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Budgeting, killing debt, rejecting stagnation, saving, and finally, giving.
And for you listening right now, why does this matter? We live in a modern era flooded with complex, hyper-analytical financial advice and honestly valid systemic complaints.
It's easy to feel drowned in data and excuses.
Yeah. Basic, aggressive common sense might just be the loudest and most effective wake-up call for taking control of your own life.
It certainly forces you to move. But I want to leave the listener with a final provocative thought that builds on this deep dive.
Oh, I like where this is going. What's the thought?
Well, Ramsey insists that wealth comes from individual action rather than relying on systemic help from Washington, quitting low-wage jobs, refusing debt. But imagine if everyone in the country perfectly followed this advice tomorrow.
Okay, a thought experiment.
Right. If everyone refused to work at places like Walmart or McDonald's, and everyone hoarded all their margin for investments instead of spending it on credit, how would the fundamental structure of our entire economy have to change to survive?
Wow, that is a massive paradox to ponder. A debt-based economy surviving without people going into debt. Incredible. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the sources, and we'll see you on the next one.